Okay, hello everybody. We are live. No, we're not live yet. It's in a few minutes, I think. I think we are live, are we? No, can everybody hear? No, can everybody hear? Okay, so we are live.
Yes.
Wonderful. Welcome everybody to this live, which has been organized with the Comitato Nucleare Ragione.
Wonderful.
And Xeon Lights, which we have hosted tonight. And I also like to welcome Pierluigi, which is the president of the Comitato Nucleare Ragione. She's going to be with us just for a few minutes for a brief introduction, and then we'll go ahead with our little chat with Xeon Lights, which I'm going to present in a moment. Pierluigi, do you want to just introduce the live a little bit for us?
Yes. First, I would like to welcome Zion, and yes, I'm very happy because it is our first international guest, and I'm quite excited because it is actually our first live in English organized by our association. So I'm willing to listen all the questions Salvatore has prepared, and also obviously to hear your answers, Zion, and your work you have done and you are doing with your association, Emergency Reactor, which is very similar to what Comitato Nucleare Ragione is doing in Italy. So we will understand how it's going on in UK about nuclear power, and I'm very excited to understand a little bit more about the situation in UK. So I also would like to thank Salvatore for organizing this interview, and I let you, Salvatore, do the work tonight.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Pierluigi. So I'm pretty sure whoever follows the Comitato knows already Xeon Lights, which is very famous in the environmental activism for nuclear energy in particular, but not just nuclear energy. She's a communicator. She does talks. She talks about science and facts about science. Almost everywhere in the world, I believe. So it's a big guest for us, for the Comitato. So Zion is, as I said, a communicator. She's also an astronomer, which I didn't know. So we will have time to talk about these things in a moment. So Zion, do you want to, talk a bit more about yourself as an introduction for our guests?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here in your first international collaboration. So I'm a science communicator, but I have a long history of environmental activism. So for those of you who don't know, I used to be on the other side. I used to be anti-nuclear, and I changed my mind and decided that I wanted to undo some of the damage that I did when I was protesting nuclear energy. So I threw all my energy at it and didn't expect to become a global speaker on nuclear energy. I just was trying to, correct what I had done in the past. But here we are. I have become that person, which is funny, really, because it's still sort of, to me, it's still being an environmental activist. It's just having a scientific approach to it this time instead. And I am really into astronomy, and I also wrote a book here in 2018. So I have been very involved in lots of different things, especially in environmentalism, for a long time. And now one of the main things I talk about is nuclear energy.
Brilliant. Actually, I saw the title of your book, which is The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting. And because I'm a parent, I'm actually really interested to read that book. So I'm going to find it and read it. It must be very interesting. So just before I forgot actually to say that I'm going to try to translate in Italian as much as I can the questions plus the response from Zion. It won't be every word translated because I'm not that good. But yeah, at least brief. Quindi, giusto per ripetere quello che è stato detto, abbiamo introdotto Zion. Zion è un attivista, un ambientalista che si occupa soprattutto di energia nucleare. Ha spiegato che inizialmente lei era contro l'energia nucleare, però poi cambiando idea ha deciso di come un po' riparare quello che aveva fatto prima, anche se dal mio punto di vista non è che c'è da riparare, però in un certo senso quello è. Okay, so just going back to English now. I'm just going ahead with the first question then. So this is actually my question. It's one I wrote down. Just so everybody knows, we gathered the questions in the last 2 weeks. So we knew exactly what we're going to talk about. Quindi abbiamo fatto queste domande, le abbiamo raccolte nelle ultime 2 settimane e adesso le presenterò a Zion. So yeah, so the first question is, so you're a nuclear energy activist. So how do you see the future of nuclear energy in the UK and in Europe especially? So, come vedi l'energia nucleare, lo sviluppo dell'energia nucleare in Europa e nel Regno Unito?
I'm very hopeful, actually. I know that people are pointing at things like what happened in Germany, where they shut down their power plants, but actually so much of the public was against that. And just 5-6 years ago, you know, they wanted them shut down. So that shift has happened everywhere, I think, almost everywhere in Europe. And it's certainly in Britain as well. In the last few years, people have changed their minds about nuclear energy, and it's much more important to them that we have a clean energy transition, and they do understand generally that we can't just do it with renewables. So although I know a lot of people will say that's too slow and we should have built them 10 years ago, I understand the frustration. That's still good if we build them now and we have them in 10 years. And look, a lot of the world is doing that now. Actually, it's happening more in the East. It's happening, you know, India's trying to build them, China's building reactors, the UAE just built Baraka, amazing, very quickly as well. And I think, you know, that's good for us to see that that's happening and say, right, how can we collaborate? How can we get back on track with building them? Because we've sort of, I think, taken energy for granted. And what's happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also just generally, you know, electricity being very expensive, has really woken people up. And they're a little bit less ideological now about where that comes from. Mostly in Britain, especially, we don't want fossil fuels. We understand that, you know, there's a transition that needs to happen, but people are finally starting to look ahead to a potentially nuclear future. And this is the first time I ever remember this happening in my lifetime. So I'm really hopeful that we'll learn from our past mistakes and leap ahead and just, yeah, start building reactors. And some places are already doing it, like Poland, you know, has got a brilliant program. They're gonna soar ahead. But even here in Britain, you know, both of our parties, the main political party and the opposition, are pro-nuclear, and they're arguing about who will build them quicker. So I'm pleased to hear that, because a lot of change needs to happen in technical things like planning reform to make it easier to build them, and also, you know, other things like incentives for investors to come in and build them. And people are starting to talk about that now. Politicians are talking about that, and that's really important, because we've got past the point of should we build them, and we're in the point of how do we do it, and how are other countries doing it so quickly? What can we learn? Which I think is really important and very hopeful.
Perfect. Quindi Zion ci ha spiegato che in passato c'è stata un po' di avversione contro l'energia nucleare anche qua in UK e anche in Europa, e quindi molte centrali, come noi spesso parliamo della Germania, sono state chiuse, e in generale l'attenzione del pubblico era proprio quella di chiudere le centrali in molte nazioni. Successivamente però, soprattutto in questo periodo, c'è un grande interesse verso l'energia nucleare, soprattutto dal punto di vista delle emergenze climatiche, e quindi molte nazioni invece al contrario adesso stanno cercando diciamo, di riprendere il passo con la costruzione di centrali. L'Est ha fatto molto meglio, dobbiamo cercare di capire come fare lo stesso in Europa, e per esempio ha menzionato la Polonia, ad esempio, che sta andando molto spedita su questo tipo di programma. E quindi anche dobbiamo cercare di capire come accelerare il processo qua in Europa, noi stessi. Okay, so how do you think? So this actually leads me to the next questions, which is how big do you see environmental activism, and what role do you think it can play in favoring nuclear energy in the future?
I think people underestimate how much impact activism has on our lives, and this is, often a good thing. A lot of positive change that's happened in society is because of activists, whether it's on water quality or air quality, or how our food is grown, or many things. The problem, of course, is sometimes those positions are unscientific, and that's a problem. But that has swept, I think, across the West. This is a huge problem, that messaging is so powerful that we don't even think to question it because it becomes so normal for us. So, for example, the 1%. If I say the 1%, most people know what I'm talking about. This is messaging that came from the Occupy movement. If I say net zero, climate emergency, climate and ecological crisis, this is language that was popularized by Extinction Rebellion. I'm not saying those terms didn't exist before, they did, but that group popularized those terms, and now everyone in the world uses them, and they don't necessarily know that that's where it came from. Now, this is fine when it's for the common good. I think it's a problem when it's been bad messaging, and we know that that's happened with nuclear. We know it's happened with GMOs. It's happening now a lot with vaccines. Nothing is really safe from activist messaging. And it's very powerful when people think, vaccines cause problems or nuclear energy causes problems. One thing I always get asked about with nuclear energy is waste. Something I used to talk about when I was afraid of nuclear energy. And I think that's interesting that we talk about nuclear waste, but we don't talk about waste from solar panels. We don't talk about waste from wind turbines. This is waste that isn't recycled, that has chemicals in it that break down in landfill sites, that can contaminate water. We don't talk about fossil fuel waste that is being stored in the Earth's atmosphere. Why do we associate nuclear with waste? Like, what? That's come from activist messaging. So on the one hand, yeah, you could say that's really negative and that, that's annoying. I understand that. But actually, what I found is by creating positive messaging that had not been used before and helping to popularize that, like nuclear is clean, nuclear is zero carbon, nuclear is low carbon, nuclear saves lives. These are things that people had never heard before. And I've now seen journalists using this language. I've seen even politicians using this language, talking about good jobs for workers, through nuclear, building nuclear power plants. And that messaging didn't exist before. Now that it does exist, I've seen people all over the world using it. And I'm really encouraged by that, because it means that it's not just that negative messaging works. Actually any messaging can work. And, we all have this tool at our disposal. And that's why it's so important that we challenge the activism in the same space. We don't just go over there and we'll throw data at you and we'll show you scientific studies. No, it's about the language that we're using. It's about the messages, and often those have to be quite simple messages. And in science communication, we call them sticky messages, because that's what people will remember, but they just need to hear them enough times. And I think it's really working for nuclear, because there are genuinely so many positive things we can say about it that people just hadn't thought about before. But now they will think, oh, nuclear means, clean air. They didn't think about that before. And just in a few words, they'll think about it. And that helps people to change their minds, and also just to have better conversations about it instead of just negative ones, as has historically been the case. So the role I think it plays actually is phenomenal. I think, there's a lot of power there if we choose to use it.
In fact, I'm a follower of the Emergency Reactor, and when you publish your you talked about little sentences which are very easy to read and to remember, and they stick. I remember there was one of your posts which I published on my Facebook, which was when you were hugging the big cask of nuclear waste. I don't know where that was, I don't remember. But yeah, I just republished on my Facebook, and I'm trying to explain to people that we don't have to be afraid of that.
Yeah,
I saw a similar thing from another guy in Canada.
Yeah, it was at Sizewell B, which is here in Suffolk, where they're hopefully building a new reactor.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, one image can undo quite a lot of poor imagery of nuclear waste.
It's true. Quindi riassumendo quello che abbiamo detto in questi ultimi minuti, ho chiesto quale potrebbe essere l'impatto e qual è l'impatto degli attivisti, proprio gli ambientalisti sul tema ambientale. E Zion ci ha spiegato che l'impatto effettivamente è mostruoso, è grandissimo. Infatti, per esempio, molte cose che adesso ci diciamo, per esempio il net zero, nonostante comunque si discute nelle sedi ufficiali, noi lo sappiamo perché ci è venuto soprattutto detto da Extinction Rebellion, che comunque ha presentato il problema un po' all'opinione pubblica, ecco, rispetto ai canali ufficiali. E quindi sì, l'attivismo ha sicuramente un grandissimo effetto su come comunichiamo, e soprattutto la comunicazione deve essere semplice, così le persone possono capire. Se entriamo nella parte scientifica troppo in dettaglio, molte persone potrebbero non capire e non recepire il messaggio. Okay, brilliant. My translation. So I'm going to jump on the next question, which is, so you actually did a TED talk. You are a communicator, so you did this TED talk 4 years ago, where you talked about inspiring experience that looking at the Milky Way was for you. So sorry, I read it very badly. So you had this inspiring experience, which was about looking at the Milky Way. Do you still go out with a telescope to observe planets and stars?
I do, yeah. Any chance I get, I love it. And I actually got some space binoculars as well now, because the telescope it requires a lot of work to set up in the dark with a red light in a low light polluted area, outdoors, sometimes on hills. So the space binoculars are good because I can just carry them easily and use them anywhere. Yeah, and I think, I encourage people to do this because I think it gives you, I think being able to see, like, look at the universe and see the Milky Way is a really special experience. I wouldn't say spiritual. I'm not a religious person, but for a lot of human existence, we used to look at the stars. We used to tell stories by the stars. A lot of the language that we use for the days of the week or months comes from space. It was a really important part of our day-to-day life, was from astronomy. And then we lost that ability because we got lighting, which is brilliant. This is good that we have lighting. We lost something really beautiful that I think actually, can give you a real connection to just how small we are and how important this planet is and its place in the universe, and how special it is that we get to be here. And, you look up and you see so much. I honestly can't put it into words because I think you have to experience it. I think you can look at pictures of the Milky Way. I'd seen pictures of the Milky Way before, but actually seeing the Milky Way and then seeing Jupiter and 4 of its moons in my telescope, and seeing the red spot on Jupiter, which is a storm that's been raging for centuries. This is mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing things. And I really encourage people to do it, because I think we're all kind of missing that connection a little bit. And for me, it's like no different than nature connection. We all need time, in green spaces. I think actually we all need a little bit of time with the stars as well.
Yeah, I remember the only time I was able to see the Milky Way with the naked eye, it was when I was maybe 20 years old, and we were up with other guys up in the mountain Etna in Sicily, at around 1,000 meters above sea level. And it was night, and you could see the Milky Way exactly, perfectly, because it was summer as well. So no clouds, no lights, but it was beautiful, yes. But in fact, I believe this is sort of, we drove away a little bit from nuclear energy, but I just want to link the two things together, because as you mentioned, in ancient times, people tried to explain nature by looking at the stars and by looking what happens with the movements of the stars in the sky. And sometimes when they saw something that they didn't understand, they associated that with gods or with whatever. And perhaps that sort of reflects what we do now. So sometimes we do have doubts, and despite we do have scientific studies or scientific evidence on certain things, we still want to believe in gods, which it could be even just our convictions on something. So if I believe that nuclear waste is bad, I'm not going to look for proof or trying to understand if it's really bad for us or if it's dangerous. And sort of we try to find easy answers. And there is always a connection. So as you said, if it should look at the stars better to try to understand better what they mean, rather than perhaps just looking at superficially and get quick answers from them. So I'm going to translate quickly. Quindi effettivamente, ok, è stata una domanda un po' fuori dal tema, che parlando dell'esperienza dell'astronomia di Zion, lei è stata ispirata molto dalla Via Lattea, dall'osservare la Via Lattea, e ci ha spiegato come in effetti adesso abbiamo perso un po' la connessione con lo studio delle stelle. Ovviamente chi lo fa lo continua a fare, però diciamo dal punto di vista del pubblico generale abbiamo perso un po' questa abitudine. Io ho collegato poi dopo al fatto che le persone spesso magari superficialmente, anche in antichità, associavano dei fenomeni naturali non così diciamo che si potevano spiegare scientificamente con le divinità, e che è un po' quello che si fa adesso. Quando qualcosa non si riesce a spiegare si associa, si danno risposte semplici che spesso non ci risolvono, insomma, quello che chiediamo. Ok, so just going back in track, or back in black. So yes, this other question is actually related to the previous topic we were talking about, is why some environmental movements don't look at the strongest scientific evidence. Do you think it's because they are convinced, they're so convinced in what they believe that they don't need scientific evidence, or is it because maybe they only look at scientific evidence that confirms what they believe?
So I think this is an interesting question. This is a good question. They absolutely do believe what they believe. Often, you know, their hearts are in the right place. They want to do good things in the world. This is my experience. When I spent time with those groups, it's often people that are creative. They do have a big social conscience. They do care about the state of the planet. They don't necessarily have a high level of science literacy. And then now I spend a lot of time with people who have a high level of science literacy. And I think that when we're on that side, we forget that most people don't. Like 90% of people just don't. They're not scientists. They're not scientifically trained. They go through the school system. That doesn't mean they understand how to read research reports or where even to go to look to access journal articles, how to interpret data, whether, you know, the difference between a case study with 12 subjects versus one with 1,200. You know, this is the crux of the problem. So you have the group with the knowledge who are really good with data and numbers, but precisely because they're good at those things, they don't engage emotion so much. They don't do emotional storytelling. That's why we didn't have those phrases before. for nuclear, right? But we do have them on the other side. We have negative stories. We have lots of terminology that's only used to frighten people, and it's very powerful. I was afraid, for many years. I was afraid of radiation. Obviously, now I feel stupid about that. I understand that radiation is part of everything, but it's not that I didn't know that before. It's just that the truth is, for most human beings, emotions are more powerful than numbers. You can show a person all the numbers in the world, right? But if they are deeply afraid of something, it is very hard to unpick that. And I really think the best way to unpick it is to do better storytelling, to do scientifically accurate storytelling. This is actually quite a hard sell. I know scientists who just say, well, it's not important, we don't think you should. Or I even had people say recently that it's not possible, but I don't think that's true. If you look at a lot of science writing or non-fiction scientific books that tell you the story behind, Jane Goodall's work, or if you look at David Attenborough documentaries, you have David Attenborough there. This is really good ways of storytelling, but it's still fact-based, but it engages you and it interests you and you trust the communicator. And that trust is really important. Now, what happens is people trust a lot of communicators who are frankly anti-science, but they are good storytellers. They will draw you into a story and you will believe them. And this is historically, this has been part of humankind for a long time. Back when we first learned to use fire, we'd sit around a hearth and we'd listen to storytellers. They would tell us stories about the stars, about Zeus, and all of these different ideas that we have today, not just in Greek mythology, but all around the world. In Australia, they have different Aboriginal stories. The storytellers are really important and they often help to shape society. A lot of Greek mythology is telling stories about morals. Don't do this because this happened to this person in this story. Really simple ideas. Now, the scientific community has not been as good at doing that. There are some people who do it really well, but there's not very many. And if you look on the other side, there are so many storytellers. So really, I think it's important to start engaging people by not deviating from the science. But the fact is, people don't need to know the details, right? They don't need to know what kind of reactor someone's building, or they don't even need to know how many gigawatts it is, right? They need to know what that means for them. How long can they keep the light on? That's what I'm saying when I'm saying less numbers, more storytelling. Now, that's a hard battle. So I stand in the middle now, where I'm trying to engage both sides, and there's resistance. So the artsy, creative people find it hard to understand the numbers, and that they don't change their minds based on numbers. And the people on the scientific side they don't like telling the stories because they say, well, that's not all of the data. But actually, most people do not respond to just data. We have to accept this as a fundamental truth about people, because otherwise we cannot challenge the damage that's being done with people who use misinformation to meet their own aims. And so this is something that I'm trying to encourage right now at the moment. I know that it works. I've seen it work. There's lots of research that shows that it works to use storytelling in science. When you talk about those little phrases, that's all that's doing. A photo of a meme, a photo of hugging waste is telling a story, right? Who is this person? Why is she hugging waste instead of a tree? Oh, she used to hug trees. This is interesting. This is a story. That appeals to a lot of people, and I use it, and it's a true story, so it's even more powerful. But we do need more people to come out and to do that, even if they're just talking about their own reasons for why they like nuclear. Instead of telling people technical details about a new power plant, tell them why you care about that power plant being built, because then you'll probably find some common ground, and common ground is the strongest way to overcome the issues.
So what I find is when you base your communication on numbers and data, you do get a quite big number of followers, though, because all the nerds or everybody, all those people who like to have numbers and play with numbers. But they probably a very small percentage of entire population, unfortunately. In Italy, we had, I believe last year, there is this wonderful communicator online. It's called Cartoni Morti, which does little cartoons with jokes and things like this. It's very fun. It does have millions of subscribers on his YouTube channels, and he's pro-nuclear. He did a video about nuclear energy, which it was a bit technical in the end. So, but there were little jokes, things like this, and that was a really bang on the spot. I think that was very good, and many people probably, at least maybe they weren't convinced, because it's hard to convince people, but at least they got a question mark on their heads.
But the important thing there is, even if it was very technical, that person was among among the millions of people that are looking at their work, and that's already very powerful.
Yes, it's absolutely, no, trust is probably the most important thing. People have to trust you to believe you, otherwise it's a lost battle from the beginning. Quindi stavamo parlando sempre del fatto degli attivisti della comunicazione, cosa devono fare per farsi ascoltare meglio, e Zion ci ha spiegato che spesso parlare dei numeri è inutile, perché molte persone a parte non capiscono i numeri, o comunque magari non hanno voglia di ascoltarli, e quindi la comunicazione deve essere semplice e soprattutto deve cercare di raccontare una storia, così le persone vengono diciamo, attratte dalla storia, capire che c'è del sentimento dietro, che c'è un'esperienza da raccontare e da condividere. Ok, wonderful. So talking still about public perception of nuclear power. So the most common arguments are the accidents, Chernobyl and Fukushima. So we talk about addressing them. Actually, I believe we already answered this question, because it's about trying to talk to people about these problems in a different way, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Even the accidents, it's trying to effectively explain them for what they were, of course, not denying them that they were serious accidents, but in the end compare with everything else, and compare it not just with numbers, but telling a bit of a story and trying to engage them in this storytelling. So this other question is very interesting, which I'd like to know more. I know you talked about at the beginning as well, but so what is actually your journey as an environmental activist? And why did you want to become, well, first an environmental activist, and why you focused on climate change?
So I learned about climate change at school. We called it global warming then. And I just found it deeply worrying, even though, the consensus wasn't as strong as it was then as it is now. We know now, more now. But I don't know, something about it frightened me. And what I realized was, even at a young age, I was talking about it and nobody around me seemed to care. And I think it just, it's an abstract problem. It's a far away problem. People have their own day-to-day things to deal with. I was just a child, but I was starting to worry about it already. And I was learning about things, like deaths from air pollution, or, what was happening with the ozone layer back then, which is something we remedied. And so I wanted to get involved. I had, again, as most activists do, I had a good heart. I wanted to do good things in the world. And I thought maybe this is something I can help with. So I joined organizations, but this is how I was involved in many, many different activist groups over the years. And I did every kind, I won't go into detail, but I did every kind of activism. I helped to shut down coal-fired power station. I was arrested for that. Helped to protest tar sands investment. I was a typical activist fighting against what I didn't like, what I understood to be damaging for the environment. But when you're in the environmental movement, in those groups, in the traditional groups, you don't tend to think about what the solutions are. You don't tend to think about, well, what's a better way to build this? That took me many years to go through that journey. So then I wrote my book, which actually came about because I was a parent. I was a young parent, and all the books I was reading about being an environmentally friendly parent were full of misinformation. Like absolutely every single book on the market had things that were anti-vaccination, or they were anti-doctors, and pro-homeopathy. They were completely full of misinformation. So I wrote my own book. I went to a publisher and I said, what about an evidence-based book, and this was interesting because this was the first time I fell out with my community. The environmental community didn't like that there was a chapter in there on the need to vaccinate. They said I was a big pharma shill, who's paying you, and I realized there's something wrong here. First of all, with the denial of the science. Secondly, the very strong emotional response to that, and third, maybe I should be communicating better. Like maybe I didn't communicate it as well as I could have in that book. That's what I went away thinking. So I went back to university. I did a master's in science communication. I learned a lot on that course. I learned a lot about, just the way that messaging works and the way that it's difficult to have these conversations with polarized topics, or wedge issues as we call them, which everything is a wedge issue now because of social media. Everyone's fighting about everything. So I thought it's really important to build those bridges and have conversations, and that's the best way to try and improve the state of the world and fight climate change. So I did that, and then I was asked to join. I did my TED talk. Then I was asked to join Extinction Rebellion as spokesperson. And I kind of had stepped away from these groups a lot because they can be very vicious when they don't agree with you. So when they didn't agree with me about vaccines, I got cancelled from things. People would leave me 1-star reviews just because they didn't like, they thought I was a pharmaceutical company now. I thought that was really sad, and I distanced myself. But now they said, come and join us. You be a spokesperson, you'll have a lot of, power and respect. And I thought, well, actually, if I don't do it, somebody unscientific will do it. Somebody unscientific will go on television and tell people things that aren't true. So I'll do it because then I can be accurate. And I did try to do that for about a year, until after about a year, it became impossible because there were too many other people in the organization who were making things up and saying them on television, and I couldn't defend that. So I left another group. And, I never stopped caring about these issues. I never stopped caring about my fellow humans, or all life on the planet, or the air that our children breathe. I never stopped caring about that. I just kind of was like, I've tried every group, I've written the book, I've done the talks. What do I do now? Which is why I ended up founding my own group, because what I realized was when I started talking about this, lots of people agreed, and they said, we're exactly the same. We care and we want to do something, but we want an evidence-based group. And we want to not just be excommunicated or bullied if we have a different opinion. That's not good. So I founded Emergency Reactor, and people just joined of their own accord, really. And it's been really positive. And I think it's encouraged more people to be able to leave some of the other groups, because they don't completely lose their community. Then they can come to a very accepting community, which is evidence-based. So that's a short version.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's very difficult where you have a group where you need to fight for what you want to say. It's not even opinions. I was going to say opinions, but it's not opinions. If there are some facts here and there, quindi ricapitolando, ho chiesto qual è stata la sua storia nell'attivismo sul clima, per il clima. Quindi lei all'inizio ha iniziato da bambina perché ero interessata all'aspetto, ovviamente, perché c'erano dei fatti che erano comunque preoccupanti, il cambiamento climatico e il buco dell'ozono che adesso si è risolto, però diciamo già da quel momento iniziavo a parlare degli argomenti, poi di questi argomenti proprio militare nell'attivismo. Poi nel tempo è riuscito a comunicare, diciamo, a livello più elevato, in canali più grandi, addirittura anche a parlare in televisione, a parlare a gruppi più grandi, però trovava sempre molta difficoltà perché ci sono sempre comunque persone molto più famose, molto più grandi, che vanno lì in TV e vanno a parlare di cose non scientifiche, cose errate. E quindi dopo un breve attivismo con Extinction Rebellion, dove anche lì la comunicazione non è stata molto semplice, ha lasciato e ha fondato il suo gruppo che si chiama Emergency Reactor, dove I think you can hear the Hoover, I hope you can, but there is a bit of background noise here, c'è un po' di rumori di fondo. E niente, quindi dopo aver fondato Emergency Reactor finalmente ha trovato il suo spazio dove può parlare di quello che vuole in un certo senso, soprattutto con basi scientifiche. Okay, so yeah, we have other questions which are actually very similar, and I believe you answered them in effectively what you said so far. There is one which is slightly different, which is about renewable energy. So I know that everybody is so excited about nuclear, nuclear not, but hopefully, but about renewable energies. And you know, I go around the tube here in London, you get these posters with commercials saying, "Oh, we built this massive solar." Or there is one which is, "We built this solar farm in Morocco, and we're going to now build a big cable to lay a big cable between Morocco and the UK, and we're going to solve our problems." You know, these very big announcements. But what do you actually think about renewables? Do you think they can do something, or maybe not?
Sure. I mean, look, so the countries that have been able to decarbonize have used a combination of renewables and nuclear energy. I don't like that word renewables because it includes biomass, which is very polluting, shouldn't be in there. And also because then when you say renewables, people think wind and solar, but actually it's normally hydropower. When countries with large grids have been able to decarbonize successfully, either they have a lot of hydropower and then they add some nuclear energy, or they have a lot of nuclear energy. And they typically only have a little bit of wind and solar. And the reason for that is because that's the only way to do it. You have to have a lot of baseload generation, as I know you know this already, but a lot of people don't know this. I didn't used to know this. This goes back to storytelling. Renewables have amazing storytelling, even though, as I say, renewables technically include biomass, which is burning wood for energy, which is very polluting, actually. And, you know, Greta Thunberg has spoken out about this. A lot of environmentalists are speaking out about that, at least. But it makes you wonder why renewables have such a squeaky clean, happy, futuristic image, when that just isn't the reality, you know. And when I was, 10 years ago, when I was advocating for renewables, I knew that we couldn't do 100% renewables there and then. Like, we all knew that, all the environmentalists knew that, but we believed that in a few years we'll be able to. Now, this to me is like, you know, it's like fusion. Like, yeah, we can be hopeful and it'll be incredible. Maybe it's a few years away, or maybe it's a decade away. Now, the thing is, it has been a decade. We cannot keep saying, we'll wait a few more years, we'll wait a few more years. We have to be honest that no large grid in the world has been able to do this, to decarbonize without nuclear energy, unless they have a lot of hydropower, but even those countries still use nuclear energy. So, you know, that it's a bit of a mouthful, but actually, when I've explained this to people, often they just didn't know. They've been sold this fantasy. Like you say, you see all the advertising and this beautiful imagery of this solar powered future. You know, they don't even think of solar panels and wind turbines as technology. A lot of people don't think of them as huge manufacturing projects, which they are, right? They're built in factories in other countries, usually China actually, in the case of solar panels, almost exclusively in China, they're shipped here, which has an environmental cost, and then they have to be constructed. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have renewables. I think the one thing wind and solar have that nuclear doesn't quite have yet is a social license, which means that it's easier to build them, you know, in theory. So, you know, Germany is a good case study because they managed to build a lot. They put a lot of money into it. But even though they spent billions of euros trying to decarbonize with just renewables, they failed. They failed. And now they're trying again. They're throwing more money at it while saying that nuclear is too expensive. But they shut down 11 nuclear power plants. If they had kept those and done the renewables, maybe they could have achieved something. But they chose the ideological route, and now what's happening? Now they're clearing villages so that they can mine more coal, and it's lignite coal, which is the dirtiest kind of coal, you know. So I think this has, for the people who've seen this happen, it has helped a little bit because they know that, you know, that country really tried, those politicians really tried to just do it with renewables. The problem is there is misinformation from just a couple of people who print scientific papers, which is problematic. And in those papers, they say we can achieve 100% renewables. But this is essentially an experiment because it has never been achieved for a large grid anywhere in the world, even though Germany has tried. And now Australia is trying to do it as well. They're talking about building this huge infrastructure across the country. And, you know, I've spoken there many times, and I've basically said to them that it will fail because with the current technology, it's not good enough. It's not good enough to power the entire grid. So they're building these really expensive batteries. They're like 50 billion or something per battery. And those batteries only store power for a few hours, like 3 to 4 hours.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's not possible to do it with them alone, but it's fine to have renewables as a top up on top of building a lot of nuclear. And as we know, nothing is perfect. Like, look at what just happened with the dam in Ukraine, or the old Banqiao dam disasters in China. That was that hydropower that actually, you know, when something goes wrong, it really goes wrong. But ultimately, when energy goes wrong, when we don't have enough energy, we've all experienced that, I think, this winter. And I hope that more people will learn from it and not take risks and gamble on experiments when we know what works, and there's no real reason not to do what we know works.
But you know what I see is that, well, there are two things. The first is they want to build these big batteries to try to store energy. But, you know, we can fear a dam because we see this very big storage of water that eventually will go down and will give us the electricity again, and then we pump up to store the energy. But the battery, if it needs to store the same amount of energy of the dam, is a chemical energy that's stored in there. If that energy, for whatever reason, is released accidentally all of the sudden, it can create a disaster as well, which could be catching fire or explode or whatever. So it's, when you store energy, it's always something very big that you're trying to put somewhere, which eventually will go off and cause damage. So yeah, so do you think that you know, between the challenge of getting enough storage for renewables rather than maybe getting development in the nuclear industry with the SMR or other type of reactors, if you were to place your bet, what do you think? Where would you place your bet?
I would place my bet on regular plain old nuclear power plants. They work. France decarbonized in the 1980s by building, was it 58 reactors? Now they're replacing some of those reactors, but that's many years of clean energy and having a clean grid. Imagine if all of Western Europe had done that in the 1980s. Would we even have climate change today? And the reason I say that is not because I'm against SMRs. I think SMRs are great. I hope we do build them. But it shouldn't be at the expense of nuclear power plants. I've been to visit a lot of nuclear power plants around the world now, and I see the same things every time. I see people in good jobs, unionized jobs, who can earn a wage, who can support their families, who want to be able to contribute using their expertise towards, cleaner air and fighting climate change, and they are able to do that. And I think people never talk about this, like the human face of nuclear. Like, this is really good. You go to France and you meet the workers. This is amazing. These are people with so much scientific expertise. It's not me that builds society, it's the engineers that build society. These people need that work. And actually, I think you can kind of measure the success of a society by how many engineers it has, right? And how many scientists it has. And I think it'd be sad to lose that. So yeah, for me, there's a lot of different arguments, and one of them is workers. The other thing is just, I know that in principle SMRs work. I know that, but we don't have an example of a large grid decarbonizing with just SMRs. Now, if that happened tomorrow, then I will 100% jump on that bandwagon, because I'm not paid by any industry. I'm not wedded to any particular technology. I just want to see the world decarbonize, but it needs to be done efficiently. Like, we don't have more time to try things and fail. If they're built alongside regular nuclear power plants, that would be fine. But what I'm already seeing is like some friction between these different elements. Like, should we fund this or should we fund that? I think that's problematic, because there's nothing wrong with regular nuclear power plants. There's nothing wrong with it. There's been a couple of accidents, yes, but there've been dam accidents, right? There are accidents, as you say, they can happen with batteries. In fact, there've been accidents now with electric vehicles here. It's caused a little bit of a backlash, because people are realizing nothing is zero risk. But for me, the biggest risk is not taking action now, just because we have a preference for one thing over the other. And actually, I would like to see us do what we know works. If all of Western Europe said today, we're going to build 3 reactors in 10 years, like they just did in UAE with Baraka, that's 25% of their electricity, just like that, 10 years. And they'd never done it before. They had no industry to speak of. They started from scratch. They trained so many people, and lots of women. They trained lots of women to become engineers. This is amazing. I would like to see more of that happen, because we've already seen it happen in so many countries. I think it's easier to replicate. Whereas for me, if you say 100% renewables, which we've seen fail in one case study, or SMRs, which we haven't seen decarbonize a grid yet, I would say that they are still experiments at this stage.
Yeah, but do you think ESMRs could help to sort of reduce the cost of nuclear energy? Because one of the biggest arguments is that nuclear energy is too expensive, or it takes too long.
But this is a lie, right? Because the average build time for regular nuclear is 10 years, average. Average build time for an offshore wind farm is 10 years. Like, nothing can be built overnight, right? And at least with the nuclear, that's 24/7 power. You're not getting that with the offshore wind. You're getting offshore wind and then something as backup. So I did a Substack article on cost, because it's such a big topic. And I noticed that a lot of people weren't arguing about it. They'll argue about waste, so they argue about air pollution, but nobody wanted to touch cost. So I did a deep dive into all of the data. What's actually happening with cost? Nuclear is not expensive. It's not. If you think how long these power plants run for, like Japan's extending some of theirs now, aren't they? This is 60-year-old plants. That initial cost was a very low cost for something that lasted 60 years. If you build a wind farm or a solar farm, they last around 25 years. So what are you comparing when you say the cost is cheaper? Are you comparing 3 farms versus 1 nuclear power plant? And are you including the base load? So when it's not windy and it's not sunny, are you including the cost of keeping the fossil fuels generating so that you can increase it. No one's including this, and they should, because actually, if you do and you look at everything holistically, nuclear is not expensive. It is already cheap. Now, yes, like in Britain, there have been delays. We've had problems with supply. We've had problems with politicians changing their minds, going back and forth. We've had problems with shortage of workers. We've had a lot of problems that have made it more costly and slow. But if you look at South Korea or the UAE, they build them very quickly. In South Korea, it's like 3 to 4 years. They build a reactor and they build the next one. There's even a scientific paper on this. It's called the standardization model. If you build them with the same engineers again and again, the cost comes down and the build time comes down. So actually, this is not a problem with the technology. This is a problem with how it's implemented by governments. Some are doing it really well, and some, like my own, are just, why is it taking 15 years to get a reactor online? No, it doesn't have to. And then that does make it more expensive. Of course it does, but it doesn't have to. So I don't think it is a strong argument against. I think it's more misinformation that really needs calling out.
Yeah, no, I believe so too. It's the same as I do like a stupid example. When you go buy cheap clothes that you need to buy every month almost because they get damaged, instead of buying a good one. It's very expensive at the beginning.
And the clothes don't work all the time.
Sorry, clothes?
And the clothes don't work all the time.
Well, yes. Yeah, or somebody can get fatter or whatever, so no, I cannot wear that anymore. I realized I lost a bit of the Italian translation. I tried to catch up very quickly with what we said before. Quindi ho saltato un paio di domande nella traduzione italiana. La prima che ho saltato è stata quella sulle energie rinnovabili. Cosa pensa Zion rispetto alle energie rinnovabili? Un po' quello che sappiamo noi, se seguiamo le vicende dell'energia nucleare, è quello che un po' ci diciamo sempre. Alla fine poi abbiamo parlato un po' anche del costo tra nucleare e rinnovabili, sul fatto che le rinnovabili non sono cheap, comunque, quindi non sono economiche come si pensa, e comunque non sono così green come si pensa. Quindi è più una questione di comunicazione. Le rinnovabili hanno spesso, grossi persone importanti che le supportano e magari riescono ad avere più attenzione, o comunque il fatto che le persone pensino che sia sole o vento e che sia semplice farle, questo può favorirlo in un certo senso. Poi abbiamo parlato del costo dell'energia nucleare. Zion pensa che, per esempio, abbiamo parlato degli SMR, comunque possono essere una soluzione, ma non necessariamente. I grandi reattori che abbiamo avuto fino adesso sono una tecnologia che conosciamo e che sembra che siano più costosi, ma in realtà non lo sono. Alla fine bisognerebbe fare un costo complessivo e soprattutto imparare dall'esperienza. Lei parla ad esempio dei reattori costruiti in Corea, che sono stati costruiti molto velocemente perché lo stesso team che aveva costruito il primo reattore veniva spostato con il secondo. So Zion, just catching up on this, learning from the experience that you said in Korea, they built the 2 reactors. I've heard that this is what would be applied for the construction of Sizewell C potentially. So the team that builds that's building now Hinkley Point C will be just moved over to Sizewell C. So that hopefully it's a great.
Yeah, exactly. And then the workers still have jobs. Now they have the expertise, so it will be quicker, it will cost less. But the government hasn't properly signed off Sizewell C yet. A lot of people have been there protesting it, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, hopefully, I hope so. We are organizing a visit to Sizewell B actually with the Comitato Nucleare, John. If you want to join in, we're going to do the 23rd of October 2023, of course. And yeah, well, there's still a lot of time to do, but yeah, we'll keep in touch. There was another interesting question, and then we're a bit over the hour. Probably just another couple of questions, and then we'll leave you free. So recently, these activists that they look very scared of global warming. They probably think we need to act so quickly that people are start panicking almost. and that panic, it's leading them to do maybe some inconsiderate actions, ruining arts, or going, blocking the traffic in the middle of a massive road. So if you were to talk to them, what would you tell them to do instead of trying to avoid these things? What they should do instead? I know you already said, but I mean, why they shouldn't be so, maybe, well, I use the word aggressive, but maybe it's not the proper one.
I have tried having these conversations. In my experience, a lot of young people especially are being told, scary stories about the future. They genuinely believe that they will not grow up to have, into their 30s. They will not have an adulthood. They are choosing not to have children. They're afraid for the future. So they're desperate, and they have been told to panic, right? Greta Thunberg said that. She said you should be panicking. And the problem for me is not that they're undertaking actions. I've been there, I've done that. The problem for me is that it doesn't change anything. I've tried it. I'm not saying that, and I know what they would say. They would say, well, civil disobedience works. It worked for Martin Luther King, and it worked for civil rights. It worked for Gandhi, and he did the Salt March. I understand that. But these are very specific examples where they were also fighting for something. They were fighting against, oppression, but they were fighting for rights as well. And I think actually the climate movement is missing that. Like, when you ask people what positive vision do you have of the future, if your civil disobedience works, they don't have a positive future. They genuinely believe that we're doomed and that's it. And I think A, that's really sad, and B, it means they're not looking at solutions ever, and they're not looking at building a better future, which is absolutely possible, right? Like, they've been completely misled on this point, and that's how they're different to other movements that were fighting for rights, that were fighting for a better vision for their children, a better world for their children to grow up in. Now I speak to people and they think we won't have children because they won't have a world to grow up in, and this just isn't true. Maybe it could turn out to be true, but there's no evidence at this point that it's true. Yes, there is species decline. There are impacts from a heating planet. We know about all that, but every change we make today makes a difference tomorrow. That's that. I've had these conversations. I even went on a television program here where I debated one of my former colleagues from Extinction Rebellion, and I argued with her saying, you're not winning people over. It's not working. I said in the beginning, the actions were useful because they drew attention to the problem. But now everybody cares about the problem. Like, that work is done. Now they want to know, how do we fix it? You can't keep telling them it's all just bad and it can't be fixed, because then everybody gives up, And, we had this debate on this program. I didn't convince her. These people have been told scary stories, and it is very hard to overcome those stories. What I try to do now is tell better stories about, so for example, I wrote an article recently, which was, what will a high energy future look like? Is the idea that we can have energy abundance, but not at the expense of the planet, that we can have, kind of harmony. It shouldn't be a radical idea, but it is a radical idea, because traditionally we've always been told by environmentalists, the only way to have a good planet is if you stop using energy. Too much energy is bad. And that's not true, actually. Energy, lifted us out of poverty. For most of human history, we lived in poverty. We burned a lot of fossil fuels, so we had development and we left poverty. We have a high quality of life now. We have access to education and healthcare and heating and everything that we need. The problem is now we know that that's also polluting and it has other problems. We just need to move away from it. That is not me exaggerating. It's a very simple story, but it's a true story. And so what I try to do is tell those stories to people before they get taken in by the negative, scary stories, because they're very powerful. And I've been there in those groups where it really impacts you, and it impacts your mental health, because you just start thinking, what's the point? I don't care about anything. That's why I'll stand in a road and end up sitting in jail. It's not that I'm against these tactics, actually, essentially, but A, I don't think they're helping, and B, these people who genuinely are so worried about the planet, they're just going to sit in jail wasting time now because they keep blocking roads. Like, how is that helping? So I try to get this message out now. It's, you know, again, it's difficult because that's a very powerful movement. But I think more people are getting, it's not as big as it was in the beginning. I think more people are getting a little bit fed up. There's only so many times you can be told that the world's going to end before you start to say, okay, well, I'm just going to carry on watching TV and going to work anyway, you know.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a challenge.
I can understand that sometimes the message where you put something scary behind it becomes not more attractive, but you know, people say, well, I'll do something just in case, at least. So yeah, and they end up panicking, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm just going ahead with the last question, and then I'm going to recap in Italian at the end. So what would be your future now? What are your ideas for the future? What are your plans for the future?
Lots of plans that I'm trying to fit in around constant speaking, you know, constantly writing articles. The thing is that with nuclear, you can't do too much because so little has been done for so many years. There's so many films and TV shows and books and stories against nuclear. That will take time to unpick and to challenge. And I've been doing some of it. Lots of other people now, thankfully, are as well. But it's hard for me because if I turn down an event, if I don't speak at an event, then I look at the panel later and they just don't have anyone on there that will speak about nuclear. There still aren't enough advocates. There aren't enough people who are confident to have conversations. And I understand that, you know, public speaking is hard. I understand. But that means that I'm constantly drawn into it. Whereas actually, for me, I would like to do more broad science communication because for me, this is where the problems begin. Like, what if instead of fighting misinformation, which is what we're doing essentially in nuclear, you know, instead of firefighting, what if you can prevent that misinformation in the first place by helping to encourage critical thinking skills, looking at things like education reform, at least over here, you know, science isn't taught very well. I would really like to do more of that, and I'm trying to find ways to fit it in. Another thing that I'm constantly asked about, I gave a talk recently here in Liverpool, and people kept coming up to me saying, can I buy, you know, they really liked my talk. And these were all people that were on the fence. They didn't know anything really about what's going on with energy. So they learned a lot in this 50-minute presentation. And they're saying, where can I buy the book so I can show somebody else? And I said, there isn't one. I haven't written one. So, but I think probably it's quite important to write down the story because people respond to different things. Some people like to listen to podcasts, which I do a lot of. Some people like to watch television, and some people like to read and take in information that way. And I don't think anybody has the same story as me. I don't think anybody has that background that I have and knowledge that I've gained about changing minds and shifting what environmentalism can mean. And someone with my background, as someone from, you know, a working class background, who's a person of color, like these are quite important things in that movement. So I would like to be able to make time to do that because I think that could be quite important. And then I could reduce all the talks and writing because I just say, just go and read this one book. So hopefully that's something I can carve some time out for next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One time I went to a bookshop here in London and I couldn't find anything in favor of nuclear energy. The only one that maybe, well, it is in favor of nuclear energy is the book from Bill Gates, how to fight the climate disaster.
It's quite technical though. It's quite technical.
Yes, there's a little chapter about nuclear energy, but it's very, it talks about everything pretty much. Yeah, we need another book, so if you please write one. Well, I need to catch on the one you already wrote anyway. Okay, so I just wanted to check if Pierluigi or Marco are in the background. They want to just jump in again and maybe say goodbye. Zion, and we can close the live stream. It's been an hour and a quarter approximately. Oh, Pierluigi is here. Okay. So yeah, Pierluigi, just go ahead.
Yeah, well, we are at the end, I guess. Or do you have other questions?
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah, so the questions we have approximately, well, they're all done. Some are just Zion has responded pretty much on those that were sort of similar. From the public chat, I cannot find any. So I don't know if maybe you yourself have a question you want to ask Zion, and then we close up. And I can recap in Italian, which I still forgot to do.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any questions, so I'm satisfied by this interview, and I would like to thank Zion again.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks a lot. We should catch up in London again with your. So if you want, not you're organizing a table here in London to talk about nuclear energy. I don't know. Do you want to give a little brief on that and what emergency reactor does?
Yeah,
In the UK.
we do a lot of public engagement. So we go to big cities in Britain and we set up a stall. You might have seen this stall because I put a picture online with me sitting at the stall with some leaflets and some bananas. And there's a big banner that said, "Change my mind." Anyway, it was copying a meme, a famous meme, but I made the meme real life. Anyway, it attracts a lot of attention. We have hundreds of conversations with people about nuclear. Again, mostly people just don't know anything about it. They have a lot of questions. They almost always go away saying, "Yeah, okay, I agree with that." So it's a really, really good way of convincing people. Something I like to point out is people get really excited when they have a viral tweet or like a viral thing on social media. Lots of people have seen it, but I've had tweets where millions of people have seen it, but that doesn't mean that from one image or one post that they change their minds. But when you have a conversation with someone one-to-one, you can see that they were changing their minds. This is the oldest communication, right? Like the first communication that we ever learned is to have those conversations. So I really encourage people to do this kind of advocacy in their own countries as well. But yeah, we do it in Britain. So if you'd like to get involved, we have a website, emergencyreactor.org. Everybody's welcome to come and hand out bananas, and we will be doing one in a couple of weeks in London as well.
Yeah. Were you also in Berlin when
Yes.
they shut down the?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember you talked about this. I had a chat with another guy, which now forgot his name, a member of Emergency Reactor the other day, and he was also in Berlin.
Yeah, Mark Dawes.
Yes. Yeah, that was a quite inspiring moment, although sad. But he mentioned that all the talks that were on the stage, they were very inspiring, trying to make people aware of the big mistake that Germany did. And actually, people say, well, probably there are statistics on this. They made a poll, I believe, that actually Germans are in favor now of nuclear energy.
They are.
So that's a big shame. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thanks again, Zion. Thanks, Pierluigi, for your time, and Marco, which is in the background.
Well, thank you for having me.
Out.
Brilliant translating.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Yes, I actually. Oh, there is a last-minute question, which we can, which we can go with that. Which is the best nuclear power plant design among the existing ones?
The best design is the one that you build.
It's true.
I mean, we have EPRs here, but we're taking a long time building them, but they don't have to take a long time. They're all good reactors. So long as you don't build a RBMK, it's fine. Nobody builds.
No, they're gone now, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, I don't know. There are other last-minute questions. Otherwise, we just wrap up. doesn't seem like there are. Okay, so then thanks again. Good night, everybody, and let's catch up soon with another live, possibly.
Bye.
Good night. Bye bye.
Bye.